You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network and the John Fredericks Radio app. Great to have you with us today. I'm your Godzilla of the truth in America, your oracle of the deplorable, Steve Bannon, joining us now. You can follow him at Citizens Republic on Twitter. Also, Steve Bannon, host of War Room Pandemic. This is the hottest, most important show in America. It runs in the John Fredericks Network 10 to noon, Monday to Friday, comes on right after me, 10 to noon on Saturday. So I should say Monday through Saturday. Now, he does a double header. So much is happening, you can't do it all in one day. 5 to 6, Monday to Friday. He's also in New York, some of the biggest markets in the United States. And you can also get him on video. You can go to America's Voice News, or if you have the Dish Network, he's live on video and radio, channel 219, same times. Steve Bannon, great to have you with us, sir.
And at 10 o'clock at night, I think, on at Newsmax, they take the show and then they cut in a B-roll on it. It's actually pretty impressive with Newsmax. Chris Ruddy and the guys on Newsmax. So the show's it's ubiquitous, and also almost 5 million downloads on podcasts. So
well, that's fantastic. And Steve, you've been we've always
the work of the John Fredericks Radio Network. Your producing team helps us do it every day, so we want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that, and you've been on the cutting edge of this, and your video, your TV, your satellite, you're all over the place. I want to know, where do we go from here? I mean, we got the $2.2 trillion stimulus that I guess is coming. Also, as you know, being a financial guy, as you were in Goldman Sachs in both New York and Los Angeles, you understand there's another $4 trillion of liquidity that the Fed is able to loan the banks. You've got the president yesterday saying we have to abandon Easter. We're going to go to April 30th. Steve, where are we in this?
Well, I think the president, look, and people have, been, mocking Trump that he's riffing on this. He's just off the cuff. I think you saw a pretty big sea change in President Trump last weekend, because I think he's getting his hands into the data, and he's doing, what CNN calls evidence-based decision making. I mean, the biggest change, I think, occurred really on Thursday, Friday, I think, at the White House with the analysis he was going through with his team. But when he left to go down to Norfolk for the USNS Comfort getting underway and going to New York City, he actually said, heading to Marine One, that he was thinking of quarantining New York City, which is something I've advocated now for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I know you saw my Jesse Waters hit on Saturday night, but
it was great.
New York City is essentially like Wuhan, and on the trend to like Wuhan. And, the president came out pretty hard. Even Governor Cuomo, who I think Governor Cuomo's done a pretty good job so far. And the polling's coming out today. I think 70% of even Republicans admire what he's doing. If you set aside the kind of whining and the back and forth on the sidebars with he and President Trump, they're actually working together very, very close. Today, the Navy ship Comfort with 1,000 beds show up on the West Side Piers. Army Corps of Engineers has changed the Javits Center into a 1,000-bed field hospital, and they're building field hospitals up in Central Park. So President Trump's commitment to the city of New York and to the state, like the other states, has been very strong. But the president, I think, looked at the data and has come to the conclusion that this thing is, like many people have been saying, is not going to peak until around Holy Week or Easter, right after that week of around the 15th to the 21st, and that have been very unwise to start to unlock these states or these regions. This idea they had of county-by-county analysis and then some sort of quadrant was just going to allow the virus to spread. And I think he started to get this feedback from governors, and even Republican governors. Remember, it was the Republican governor in Florida who shut down, who really shut down the border essentially between Louisiana and Florida. It's a part of Alabama, but he's put checks on that come across I-10. He put checks on the Georgia border, I think on 95, to make sure that people from New York were not coming in. There's been a big concern about in Puerto Rico. There's been a big concern in South Florida about the spread of this coming out of New York City, which is what happened in Wuhan, is that you have these hot zones and they spread out. I mean, here's the reality. We've got, some really bad hot zones in the country that we've got to take care of. Number one is New York. Number two is New Orleans. Number three is Detroit. And these hot zones are going to spread. And what you want to do is to break the back of this virus. What we can't do is just linger on. And I think the major fallacy of the people that wanted to unlock and trying to open up is that it's just going to continue. You're going to have this virus around forever. And what we need to do is break the back of the virus, to break the back of it as close as we can, not just flatten the plug the gap financially. There's no doubt about that. In this first bill, this $2.3 trillion may not be enough. You may have to come back with something later, but you've got to do that. That bridges you to the other side. It bridges you to the other side, and then you just get on with it, right? We either have therapeutics, which looks like are coming in, the anti-malaria drugs and these other therapeutics that are coming in. Some of them may be prophylactics that you actually take in advance. And, Johnson & Johnson just announced this morning they've been working since January on a vaccine. It'll be ready for tests sometime in the summer, and they expect to have a vaccine for this. They anticipate they could have it as early as the first quarter of 2021. So if you converge all those forces, you understand what you have to do is try to break this virus from continuing to spread, that it lingers around and we have to deal with it, because otherwise you're not going to get the economy back up. So this is a hard smash. I think the president, he said he's going to lay out tomorrow morning his analysis, his assessment, in the models that he bases this upon. And I think the president has put his critics on the back foot. I think this is another bold move, like shutting down travel from China. I think it's another bold move, like shutting down travel from Europe. And so, and another thing, there's also been some assessments this morning, John, we're going to talk about on the show, of it was an article in the Hoover Institute that some of the libertarians were using and really got to the president. It's just fundamentally wrong. I mean, the guy's analysis was there's not going to be more than 500 deaths in the United States, which is we're many times over that right now. So, look, I think the president is dealing with his scientific advisors and his other advisors, national security advisors, and I think they're making the right decision. And I think that the quicker we get through this, look, I keep saying, I know you listen to the show, if you have to go through hell, go through it as fast as possible.
Steve Bannon with us, also the host of War Room Pandemic, 10 to noon, John Fredericks Radio Network, 5 to 6 on the John Fredericks Radio Network, 6 days a week, 10 to noon, Monday to Saturday. Steve, I know you're short on time. Just tell me when you have to go. We'll go from there. You define the other side. We have to get to the other side. Steve, what's the other side? What's the metric?
The other side is back to normality. The other side is where you actually go back and live like Americans. I mean, look, this nation's built around the can-do attitude. This nation is built around the ability to get out and get on with it, right? And we're not people that just want to hang back, right? And so just to have this go on and on and on and on and on is, not a model that I think plays to America. We have to do kind of what the Chinese did in Wuhan. Look, the Chinese Communist Party is at fault for this. And I'm not saying that this came out of the weapons lab or came out of the P4 lab in Wuhan. That's for another day to see. With Senator Cotton, we're going to have an investigation, I'm sure, that's going to really find out what happened at that lab. But we do know that patient zero came about sometime in, I think, mid to late November. Okay, so they knew about this for about 60 days. And we now have the evidence of their phone calls and their contacting of the CDC, et cetera, in late December, early January. And they never really fessed up to it. In fact, there's a tweet out from the World Health Organization on the 14th of January. We talk about it on the show, so they can't delete it, that the World Health Organization says Chinese officials have informed them, there's no evidence of human-to-human transfer. That's just a bald-faced lie. And much of the destruction in your pension fund, much of the destruction in your personal financial situation, much of the destruction of all the deaths in Italy, all the deaths that are about to come in places like India, all the deaths in Europe and the United States, and principally in China, in Wuhan, China, is because the Chinese Communist Party lied to the World Health Organization, and the World Health Organization is enough of toadies that they just accepted it. So that 60 days we'll never get back, and that's what really allowed this to metastasize. Given that, when the Chinese Communist Party realized their entire regime was predicated upon stopping this in Wuhan, they took extreme measures and really wrung it out of the system. Now, it's still there, but it really broke the back of it, and I think that's what has to happen. It has to happen here. We just don't have another alternative. You just can't. It's just naive to think that you could open up certain parts of the country, because you can see this thing spreading. You can watch the spread of this thing up the Mississippi River right now from New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans is a hot spot. The governor of Florida is one of the best Republican governors in the country. He's also a guy that believes in civil liberties and, he's a civil libertarian. He does not, close the border between Louisiana and Florida on I-10 for checks. And if you have a Louisiana license plate, you have to log in. They need to know where you're going. You have to do a self-quarantine for 14 days. The governor of Rhode Island is a progressive Democrat, and certainly no 10th Amendment and no states' rights person. She literally she signed an executive order to call out the National Guard over the weekend to go door to door and to find out, particularly in places like Newport, Rhode Island, where there are a lot of vacation homes, and to find out if there were New Yorkers there and to make sure that they were self-quarantining for 14 days. That's the type of thing you're going to get. This way, at least, I think the president, as a wartime president, galvanizes the country. Now, we have to make sure that financially this tremendous drop in aggregate demand has got to be plugged. And I think this week is a telling week for the Treasury to make sure that all the small businesses get access to these loans, all the people get cash, unemployment insurance is out there, and we'll get over this. Look, there's a number. If you give business a set time frame about when you can come out of this, I think you're going to have businesses rallying to this. It's obviously one of the most extraordinary things in American history, but it shows, I think, people pulling together to work through and to get through this.
Agree with you 100%. I own a small business. I want a date. Now I have a date of April 30th. Is that date real, you think?
I think that it depends. Listen, I'm an advocate, and I've been an advocate. I don't think the 15 days to stop the spreading with Vice President Pence has been tough enough. I think we should have been much harder in social separation, and really, what you don't want to have is to have the virus have host bodies to get into. And to me, that requires even more social distancing than we're doing. I would actually put it in a much harder lockdown, and I would quarantine certain cities. And I understand quarantining is very tough to do, because remember, quarantining, you're both trying to keep people from outside from coming in, so you're trying to hermetically seal it, but more importantly, you're also trying to keep people from inside from going out. I mean, one of the problems we've had is that you still have flights every day coming out of New York to the rest of the country, and I think that's a problem. Also, remember, we've shut travel from China on airlines. There's about 22,000. When President Trump did that in January, there's about 22,000 to 25,000 people a day from mainland China that were coming into the United States. President Trump then shut down travel from Europe. But the rest of the world still flies in here. And you should know right now, India is under a 21-day lockdown, where you can still get on the plane in India and fly to the United States, Latin America. Brazil, Captain Bolsonaro has got a very different attitude on this. He's going to kind of let it run through the system, because they really don't have the medical system to lock anything down or to support, the ICU, so they're just going to let it rip. But you still have that flying into the United States. I would actually do two things immediately. I would stop all global travel to the United States today for the next 30 days. Right?
Why doesn't he do that? I mean, that makes sense. Why doesn't he do that?
I think what you've got, listen, up until Friday afternoon, the president was going to, and I'm not singling out John Fredericks, but most of right-wing talk radio was cheering him on about, let's do the county by county, let's do counties, let's do quadrants, we got to unlock, we got to go back to work. It's all this same people, same crowd that never took this seriously at the beginning, right? The same crowd that said, this is a hoax, right, is now, and the president is when he makes decisions, he makes it upon the evidence at hand. And I think what rattled him is what's happening in New York City. You've seen the videos coming out of the refrigerated trailers where they're pulling the bodies out of the ICU units and stacking them in the trailers. There's a couple of those videos over the weekend. And I think it rattled particularly Elmhurst Hospital. President Trump's from Queens. They had a day where 13 people died from this virus alone. And, the president started to drill down on it and realize that this thing is very, very serious. It's got to be stopped. But I would stop all domestic air travel, right? That's the other way it spreads. Remember, this thing spread. It spread from Wuhan to the world.
Yeah, but again, Steve, not to just in all due respect here, there's no when you say we got to get to the other side, what is the other side? Is it the percentage of deaths go down?
Yes, I think you've got the slope. I think you've peaked and you've got the slope coming dramatically down, so that you've got this thing under control. You've got to break. It's called flattening the curve. Get it below the capacity for hospitals to handle. Mine is to even do it harder, so it flattens out even more. So you have very little of the virus around and very little transmittability. And you can do this by essentially putting hard measures in.
My fear with what you're saying is there's never going to be a number that's going to satisfy those that want to keep the economy shut down. And so if you keep doing this...
I don't think anybody... This is a fallacy. I haven't heard anybody on Wall Street or any of these shows that wants to keep the economy shut down. Everybody wants to get the economy back running again. This is another fallacy. I haven't heard anybody that says, I want to shut the economy down. I haven't heard one person say that. When you say that, and when right-wing radio says that, I would love to see the evidence of that. I would just
the evidence is
hang on, stop,
restaurants are shut down.
Stop. You guys continue to throw out things like, it's enemies of the president, people want to shut the economy down. I haven't heard one element of shutting the economy down. People understand this is horrific to go through, and we can't financially, obviously, do this for a while, but the question, if you don't attack this virus and get this virus under control so it doesn't continue to spread, and you don't continue to have hot zones, particularly in places like New Orleans, Detroit, New York City, where you're going to have public health systems that are going to start eventually to collapse and then to cause bigger problems than just the virus. You're not going to have an economy to come back to. No one's saying to stopping by proclamation aggregate demand is horrific. Everybody understands that. The question is, how do we bridge it? And how do we bridge it in the smartest way possible to not damage the overall economy? One of the things I'm proudest about the show, we're the only place you can go, right? Maybe except for the White House, where you can get the smartest thinking about the pandemic, coupled with the smartest thinking about the economic crisis, coupled with the smartest thinking about the financial crisis that is triggered on a global basis, coupled with the geopolitical aspects of this. By the way, oil last night went down below $20 a barrel.
Right.
The Saudis, our friends the Saudis, right, have essentially, working with the Russians, destroyed the American fracking industry, which is one of the key elements of the Trump, economic revolution.
Right.
A full spectrum energy dominance that's got to be dealt with, and the geopolitics of China, which at the end of the day is going to be the central aspect that comes out of this. Is the Chinese Communist Party is an enemy to the Chinese people and an enemy to the citizens of the United States and the world. They are the ones that brought this destruction of the world, and they have to be held accountable. And it's going to.
How are they going to be held accountable?
Well, I think first they got to be held accountable. As anybody who took a penny, and I'm working on this nonstop. Anybody who took up any of the companies that take any of the money, right? Any of the money, particularly the big companies like Boeing, the airlines, etc., to me have to go into federal court and sue the Chinese Communist Party. Number two, anybody that takes a penny has to bring back the supply chains. I think it's quite humiliating for the United States to have these airlifts coming in from China right now with medical supplies. Right, the American people got to wake up, and quite frankly, the libertarians that have for years been talking about the free flow of capital and the free flow of labor. We've got to all those libertarian policies. All those libertarian policies is what got us in this jam.
Exactly. It's so asinine. We've been fighting this battle for 30 years, mocked on, made fun of, called names, Neanderthals, and now it's all come home. Everything that we predicted is when you turn the manufacturing and cheap labor and slave labor over to China, this is what was going to happen, and that's exactly where we are. Steve, let me ask you something else. As a veteran of the finance industry, Goldman Sachs, both in New York and Los Angeles, you build big divisions there. You know what's going on. The merging of the Treasury and the Fed here, a lot of people like me looking at this, and I'm very suspect of the banks, as you know, Steve. That's my history. I'm very suspect. And big companies, and I'm saying, okay, are we going to have a situation where this $4 extra million of liquidity merging the Fed and the Treasury is just a way for big companies to wipe bad debt away and then buy up every last mom and pop on Main Street? How do you stop that from happening, Steve?
Well, first off, look, if you're part of the Trump deplorable, base, which I consider myself deplorable, it's something I fought I fought hard with the consolidation of these companies and mergers and acquisitions, where we just have a couple of large companies in any space, right? You have 2 or 3 companies instead of 15 or 20, and that consolidation of power has been essentially the Trump administration has allowed it to happen, right, consistently, and to me that's a big problem. Also, these stock buybacks, I fought very hard. I think the lone voice in the White House in the summer of 2017 that fought the repatriation of that $3 trillion of cash, and also the corporate tax cut had to be tied to no stock buybacks. And I think a lot of stuff you saw in the stock market at the end to get to above 25,000, it wasn't really growth in earnings, wasn't really growth in production, because they weren't remember, we talked on the show, the biggest thing we hadn't had in the Trump revolution so far was massive capital expenditures, capital spending by the companies, built plant and equipment. They were buying their stock back. And I think juicing the price for the CEOs. Look, the Treasury, and I advocated this, the coming together with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, you're in uncharted waters, and I've been a big advocate. You've got to really manage that. These loans should only be to get these companies through this exogenous event, and it has to be really monitored. It has to be paid off quickly. The American people have to. The Treasury has to make money off this. We have to get it back to normal. And I agree with you. It shouldn't be any kind of crony capitalism. I think that's something that's really got to be reviewed. And I think there's got to be, I believe, penalties put on companies that leveraged up and did these stock buybacks. I don't agree with the American people. The folks out there in this audience. This happened in 2008, John, as you know better than anybody else. There was no bailout for the working class. There was no bailout for the middle class. It was devil catch the hindmost. We can't allow that to happen again. I think that's when President Trump's bill, which, look, I think has done a good job under the situation. I don't totally love it, and one of the reasons is I still don't think it's weighted enough to the little guy. But, John, we're going to see it this week with your advertisers, as I've been telling you. If this mechanism is to work, this Treasury mechanism, it should come to the rescue and aid, at least on a temporary basis, of the small businesses in Central Virginia. I mean, that's what it's made to do. It's made to me that you don't miss a payroll. That's the central part here. The $1,000 of cash and these other things are very important for the individuals. And I think particularly the unemployment benefits. These are all guided to the individual. To me, the key to this has always been the small business owner and how those loans get done and how they get done quickly. You ought to make sure that people coming to your site and texting you, et cetera, because the more we can help people at the Treasury and small business make sure that there's a streamlined process, the better this is going to be for the country. And we'll get through this in the next 3 or 4 weeks and get to the other side of this thing. But to me, the way to get to the other side of it is tougher restrictions. I would stop domestic air travel. I would definitely stop international air travel today. You don't want any more of this disease coming in to the United States than we already have. And so I think bigger restrictions just to get through this thing and let's get to the other side of it. And then we'll deal with rebuilding the country after that. Look, we had a tremendously robust economy coming into this. That robust economy awaits us on the other side of this. We just got to get to the other side.
So if I go with the Bannon plan and we do all the things that you said, do you see May 15th as a date where we're back to all clear? I mean, not that we'll be at zero, but we're back to where restaurants can open, businesses can open.
I would hope that if tougher restrictions are put in today, harder restrictions, and we start to think about either quarantining or quasi-quarantining places like New Orleans, Detroit, and New York City, that we could get there by April 30th. I think by April 30th, the first part of May, you could start to really then unlock parts of the country, or start to take all these off on a national basis. It's just you got to get through what these are called these hot zones. Here's the thing: the president tomorrow has committed. He's going to walk through, I think, in either a press conference or some sort of presentation. I think a fairly detailed presentation on the logic and the math that gets into the numbers that he laid out. You saw Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, Ambassador Birx, talk about 100 to 200,000 potential casualties on the outside if nothing's done. I think the president, he announced what he's doing last night conceptually. I think he's going to walk you through the details tomorrow.
All right, Steve Bannon.
John, I've actually got a bolt. I want to say one thing.
I know. Thank you.
I can't appreciate enough everybody out in the John Fredericks Radio Network. You've got a real rock star here at our show, and I'm very proud of this pandemic, show, because it has, I think, brought people's attention that this crisis is inextricably linked. that you can't just look at the pandemic unless you look at the economic crisis. You can't understand that until you understand the financial crisis on top of that and the geopolitics of this, which is quite important. This is a defining moment in American history, particularly seeing who our friends and allies are. The Saudis have not been a friend to the United States. We just got, you got to lay that out. They are actively, I think part of their plan on breaking OPEC was also to break the American oil industry, and that's going to have massive implications for the United States. We became a net exporter under President Trump, and from West Texas to Pennsylvania to the North Plains, the high-quality working-class jobs that created, and the value in the stock market, right, of equity value, and just these vibrant companies that were driving these communities is something we're all to be proud of. And now that's been shattered, and that's going to be one of the biggest, and that has nothing to do with the virus. That's literally an ally that we've defended for many, many decades. That it has never been explained, I think, to anybody why this is going on. And last night when oil dropped under $20 a barrel, remember the break-even point for the West Texas fracking industry is about $40 a barrel. So you're going to have just a slew of bankruptcies out there because of this. In addition, you've got this situation with China, and that's going to have to be dealt with. We're going to have to bring the manufacturing back here. It's not acceptable for us to ever be beholden. The United States is not a country that's a supplicant to anybody, right? We're a leader. We're the indispensable nation. We've been a great ally to people over many, many decades, many hundreds of years, and we cannot be a supplicant. And this is not about the Chinese people. The Chinese people are among the most decent, hardworking people on earth. This is about a totalitarian dictatorship that has oppressed them, basically destroyed, and that we now know they lied. Hundreds and thousands of people that died there because of this virus, because it's a biological Chernobyl. They have to be held accountable, and they will be held accountable.
Steve Bannon, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with us.